everyone, I am Shweta and welcome to my channel Analytics by Shweta. In today's video, we will be learning about the dates between function in Power BI. The dates between takes three parameters. First, it takes a date column, then it takes a start date, and then it takes an end date. It will return to us a table with a single column. If you miss the start date, then it will take the earliest date in the dates column. And if your end date is blank, it will take the latest date in your date column. Now remember, both the start date and the end date are both inclusive. If you look at an example given here, if we are looking at the Jan 2021 data in context, it will take the start date as 31st January 2020 and the end date as 31st January 2021. Now in this example, we are looking at 1 year back. So if you see, it is 31st Jan to 31st Jan. And this is what we would be looking into our Power BI example. So let us head to Power BI and get a better understanding of the same. Let us first have a look at our data model. If you see, the data model is the same which we have been using in our previous examples. We have 4-dimension tables connected to our fact table, the highest data, in a one-to-many relationship. Let's look at the example. Now in dates between, we are required to give a start date and an end date. So let us create two measures to calculate the start date and the end date and get a better understanding of how dates between works. So we would be creating a new measure. We would write dates between start date and let us use dates between, and we would be using the calendar date column over here. Let us then give a start date. Now we want to go 1 year back. So we would be using the DateADD function over here to go 1 year back. If you want to learn more about the DateADD function, refer to my video given in the card above. Now the first option in DateADD is we need to give it a date. As we want to go 1 year back, we are using the last date as the date column. Then we need to go 1 year back, so we are using -1 and we use here as the interval. And our end date would be the last date of the calendar date. And we close the dates between. Now if you remember, dates between returns a table of dates, but we do not want a table. We want the start date. So we would be using the first date function in front of the dates between. And we go and we close this measure and we approve it. To create the dates between end date, we require the same function. So we would just copy this. We would create a new measure. Let us name it dates between end date. And here, instead of the first date, we would be using the last date. And we approve this measure. So if you see, we have two measures. Date between start date and dates between end date. Now these dates between start date and end date both return to us a date. So let us change the format of this date. Now one thing to note is in our data set we have 3 years of data. So first let us create a table visual. Let us add the year, then let us add the month, let us add the dates between start date and dates between end date. If you look at 2020, we get 1st of January 2020 to 31st of January 2020. This is because we cannot go 1 year back from 2020. Let us create a slicer visual, and on the slicer visual, let us add the year. Let us change the format of the slicer to a tile format. Let's select 2021. If you look at 2021, it starts from 31st January 2020 to 31st January 2021. If you look at 2020 instead, it shows 1st of January 2020 to 31st of January 2020. It is not going back a year because 2020 is the first year in our data set. So let's look at the second year in our data set so that we can go exactly 1 year back to understand. Now, it says from 31st January to 31st January. So both these dates, 31 and 31, are inclusive. So this is what we mean when we say the start date and the end date are inclusive. This is very important to remember because this is where it differs from dates in period function. You can refer to the card above to learn about dates in period and how this function is differing from it in terms of the start date. So I hope you understood the differences between the start date and the end date inclusivity. Now let us proceed further. Let us create a new measure and let us write hires dates between. We would use calculate. We would use total hires. Let us use dates between. Once again, let us use calendar date. Now, in the start date, let us use the measure which we have created, which is the DB start date. And for end date, let us use the measure DB end date which we have created. And let us approve this measure. Let us go to this visual and add the hires over here. If you see, we get the hires as 4965 for this particular period. Let's have a check whether this is correct. Let us create a slicer and let us add the date. Let us also add a card visual, and here we would be adding the total hires measure. So we add the total hires. Remember, we are checking for the first entry, that is 31st January 2020 to 31st January 2021. So let's go here and select 31st January 2020 and update is to 31st January 2021, and we approve this. If you see here, we get the same value as 4965, which is exactly the same as this value. So in dates between, when you go back a year, it includes both the start date and the end date. So that is why when you looked at January, it took 31st January 2020 to 31st January 2021. This is how we use dates between in Power BI. You can further give dates instead of giving a measure for the start date and the end date. You can give actual dates. Let's see an example of the same. Let's write dates between 2. We would write calculate total hires and use the dates between. We use calendar date, and let's again look at this example. We have to give a start date. So we use the date function. In the date, we need to give the year, the month, and the day. So we give the year as 2020. We give the month as 1st and the day as 31st. That is 31st January 2020. And we give the end day as 2021 as the year, 1st as the month, and 31 as the day. And we upload this. Let us create another card visual and let us put this measure out here. If you see here, we get the same value. Here we have hard-coded the values. This is not an efficient practice, as each time you want to change, you would need to go and manually make the edits in the measure. But you can do this if you require. And here we have used a measure, whereas we have given DB start date measure and DB end date. Now in dates between, you can use different parameters. For example, we have used DateADD. We can use -1 month to change the context of the measure. So you can do different variants of this. Dates between is exactly as the name suggests. Give me the data between these two dates, that is between a start date and an end date. I hope you understood how to use the dates between in Power BI. If you like this video, please subscribe to my channel and hit the notification bell for more updates. Thank you for your time and have a nice day.